Hello and a very warm welcome to Resilient Lincolnshire Global. To everyone who's joined in live today through our social media channels on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, you're most welcome to Resilient Lincolnshire Global from the Lincoln International Business School at the University of Lincoln. I'm Ruchi Agarwal. I'm the Director of Business Development for the Business School. And it is my role to be able to bring industry and academia closer together to benefit conversations that matter to both. So in March of this year, when we all found ourselves in the situation that we are in, we began to lose face-to-face connect naturally with the businesses that we work with and the academics we work with very closely. So at that point of time, we decided to construct a digital platform, which is Resilient Lincolnshire, to be able to continue conversations, those conversations that matter to businesses for business beyond the curve, and the conversations that matter to academics to continue to have an impact on about what matters to practitioners as a whole and to knowledge base as a whole. So Resilient Lincolnshire was born, and I'm very pleased that since April of this year, continuing right till now, we've had a number of conversations with leading voices, with students, with academics, with practitioners across the greater Lincolnshire region in association with the Centre for Resilience at the University of Lincoln. They were very, very rich conversations, and you can see all of them on our YouTube channel and indeed on our Resilient Lincolnshire page on our website of Lincoln International Business School. What came out of those conversations right through these months since April were a number of themes. And when we stepped back and we wanted to look at what really mattered to leaders, what were they talking about? What were the issues that they were trying to grapple with, or the questions in their mind? We came across four themes. We really culled out four themes that we thought made a perfect platform for us to now take global. So the four themes that we pulled out of those conversations were resilient leadership, emotional leadership, responsible leadership, and technological leadership. So we call them the leadership lenses. That these were the lenses that leaders were trying to look through to see how better and how they could, conduct their business in ways that made their business a more sustainable business, responsibly so. So we had, we constructed this series called Resilient Lincolnshire Global, hence taking the conversations from local, as far as we are concerned in greater Lincolnshire, to global. And global it is. The panels that we've put together for these four themes that we picked have indeed been immensely global and a pleasure to work with. And we're very honored, deeply honored actually, to have with us a wonderful panel yet again, stretching right across the globe, voices of leaders, voices of academics who are going to help us develop these concepts further. So in week one, we spoke about resilient lens of leadership, and it was a fantastic conversation. Week two, we developed that into the emotional lens of leadership, and that absolutely was, a great build on the first one. Today, it's really special because we're going to talk about the third lens, which actually resonates very closely with the Lincoln International Business School and the university at large, which is the responsible lens of leadership. And I'm really excited, and I'm going to bring on, the anchor for today's conversation, Dr. Craig Marsh, into the studio, please.
Morning, Richard.
Morning, Craig. It's so wonderful to have you and to see you on the Resilient Lincolnshire Global webinar series again. Craig, all of these have been really key conversations, very, very important. However, this one in particular, the responsible lens of leadership, tends to echo really strongly with the ethos of the university. Would you say we do a lot with it, don't we?
We certainly do. I mean, as a civic university, this is something that is in the DNA of what we do with all of our students and with our stakeholders and our organisations. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation to hear how those aspects of responsible leadership are now being delivered in a global context.
Excellent, Greg. So, I don't want to stand between you and the fantastic panel we have. So I'll hand it over to you to introduce our panel, and we'll be watching and listening in very carefully.
Thank you very much, Rishi, and good morning, everybody. And I think possibly more than any other year, 2020 has raised the world's consciousness that humanity shares many common challenges that require concerted and collective action to overcome them. So I think it's essential that leaders across the world place these ideas of responsible leadership, ethical leadership, inclusive leadership, and practice at the heart of their strategies for change. So. And this is, unsurprisingly, as Rishi has mentioned, emerged as a key theme of our work at the University of Lincoln, both with students and organisations. So, for example, in May 2019, the university joined the global movement on climate change, was one of the first in the UK to declare a climate emergency. At the business school, we have for several years subscribed to the Principles of Responsible Management, which is the business school accreditation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And what that means is that we embed this through all of our educational activities. And we're finding that, I think, that this current generation of students actually is probably more passionate than ever before about making sure that their working lives are framed by positive action around responsible management, inclusion, climate. And so we're also finding that our research agenda is being increasingly driven by new solutions such as developing inclusive organizational cultures and solutions around circular economy. So what are the latest developments in thinking about the role of responsible management in global leadership? How do global companies place responsibility at the heart of their day-to-day operations? How do we ensure that future global leaders are engaged in the subject of ethics, inclusivity, sustainability? And perhaps particularly at the moment, has the pandemic changed our perspective or approach to building and leading sustainable companies? So to answer these questions, and I'm sure many more over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm joined by a truly global panel of experts combining both practitioner and academic experience and knowledge on this subject. So I'm really delighted to now introduce the panel who's going to join me to discuss these topics. So first of all, Professor Matthias Bal, who's based in the Netherlands, but is a professor of responsible management at the business school, combines a background of both psychology and human resource management, and is now getting a global reputation for his writing and thinking on the subject. So Matthias, pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to see you, Matthias. Next, we have Dr. Shashi Balay, a good friend of mine, based in India. Shashi has a PhD in psychology and an MBA, and he's also one of these rare people who manages to combine some deep academic thinking on the subject with also being an entrepreneur. So he's also the CEO of Shubham Hospital Solutions in India, and manages investments of 18 million pounds in various investment companies. Shashi, it's great to see you again. Shashi, I think you may still be on mute.
Thanks, Craig. Nice to
be here. We've all been caught by that.
Yes.
It's great to see you, Shashi. Next, we have Neil Muller, who's joining us from South Africa, and Neil is an operations expert, an operations manager who's got extensive practical experience in merchandise, financial, clothing, appliances, retail in global companies. So Neil, it's great to have you with us.
Good morning, Craig. Good morning, panel. Yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to the next 45 minutes as we share on this extremely interesting topic.
Thank you, Neil. It's great to see you. Next up, we have Dr. Harsh Suri, who's from Australia, joining us from Deakin in Australia, an associate professor at Deakin Learning Futures. And Harsh is particularly an expert in developing initiatives for placing sustainable development goals at the heart of an inclusive curriculum. And Harsh has been leading that work at Deakin Australia. Harsh, it's great to see you. Good evening.
Good evening, Craig. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And last but by no means least, I'd like to introduce Professor Sebastian Vaduva from Romania, currently in the US, very early, Sebastian, for you. And Sebastian again combines both academia and practice. He's an entrepreneur. He's written books on subjects of ethics and entrepreneurship and on business technology. So Sebastian, a range of experience that you can contribute today, and it's great to have you with us.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
Thanks, Sebastian. So that's our panel for today. And I'm going to kick off with perhaps a general introduction to the subject of responsible management and inclusivity. And Matthias, I'd love to bring you in on this first question, if I may, to sort of lead off the discussion. So perhaps set a little bit of context for us for our discussion today. So, particularly in your areas of expertise in developing responsible leadership inside organisations, what are you seeing in terms of the latest thinking on that? So perhaps just set a bit of context for us, if you would, Matthias.
Thank you, Craig, for inviting me on this panel as well. So Indeed, just to introduce a little bit of a context around the issue of responsible management and the importance of it. So I will very briefly speak, but I think we have to go back to the late 1980s when sustainability was something that was really introduced into corporate agendas, and so this has been 30 years, more or less, since the late 1980s, when we try to attempt to introduce sustainability into the corporate world. And with sustainability, obviously, the broader issue of responsible management in the wide sense of inclusion of a variety of issues, such as thinking about obviously climate change and how organizations contribute to it, inequalities, inclusion, diversity, and so on. And the idea behind the early attempts in sustainability literature and debates were really to integrate corporate interests and corporate concerns for profitability with environmental concerns. And so for the last 30 years, debate and attempts have been going on around the possibility of finding a balance between organizational interests, corporate interests, and environmental interests. And after 30 years or so, and we can really see this in the academic literature and more broadly as well, is that we have to acknowledge that this has failed, that it is really difficult to combine and to find a balance between corporate interests and environmental interests. So, for instance, we can see that global emissions and pollution is still increasing globally. So we are not really finding really effective ways to tackle environmental concerns, climate change, and so on. We can also see that income inequalities, are still increasing globally. And so we really have a hard time in effectively dealing with all of these grand issues, despite a lot of well-intended attempts, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. And so the question as well is how can we explain this? And in trying to explain this, we can also have a look at, for instance, Donald Trump. Because globally, we now are looking at Donald Trump, who is in a state of denial. So the whole world knows that he has lost the election, but he still is in denial, even though, of course, he very well knows that he lost the election. And many contemporary thinkers and philosophers are basically using this denial as a kind of an explanation for our current predicament. So we know that, and this is also shown in many reports and so on, but we know that we are not doing enough to really become responsible organizations to effectively address climate change and so on. But we still pretend that we are doing the best we can. And this remains a kind of a deadlock that we're still in. And we remain in this kind of denial, and what is behind this denial? Obviously, the idea that we need more fundamental and radical changes in the way organizations operate, the way organizations function in society, and the way our economic system works. So basically, still very much based on shareholder values and profitability and so on, which just don't work together well with trying to save the climate and many other issues. So what can we do? What can be done? Now, first, I'm very much in agreement that what we find in universities today is that students are very much more open towards more radical perspectives and more radical ideas of shifting the balance and designing organizations entirely around principles of sustainability and inclusion and so on. But for organizations to make that shift, it is really difficult, because ultimately the issue, of course, is to give away control. And one way, what you can see, for instance, that many academics and scholars have been promoting is the concept of workplace democracy and so on, as a way to find better ways to organize companies, to organize our economic system, and so on. And so within organizations, we see that very, very few allow organizations to be much more bottom-up driven. So where employees, where workers, where newcomers, so students with a lot of fresh ideas coming into organizations can become more self-organizing in a democratic way. So changing organizations from within. And I think there is still a long way to go. But I think there is, if there is a positive story to tell, then it is about the next generation of students coming into organizations and changing organizations from within. I think that is one of the primary ways through which we can achieve this social transformation that is needed. Because we do not have a choice, of course. If we're talking about environmental concerns, climate change, there is no choice in either retaining the status quo or to change. We have to adapt because it will, otherwise climate change will affect us anyway. Take, for instance, California, where it is currently 33 degrees, I believe, in California. So you will have many places in the world that will become just deserts, whereas there's millions of people living there. So it is not a matter of choice. It is, we have to act. So this is broadly the kind of context that we can see, and I'm very much looking forward to see the contributions of my fellow panelists.
Matthias, thank you so much for laying out the broad themes, actually, of essentially the current thinking, the current situation with regard to particularly issues of sustainability and climate change, and summarised very poorly some of the key points that I think you raised for us there. So I think one is a sense that that political leadership is in denial about the scale of the challenge that we're faced with. That organisations have been responding, but not responding enough in order to be able to meet some of those challenges, which, as you said, we don't have a choice over. And that actually, and what I'm detecting is it's not actually their fault. It's just that there are some systemic issues that in terms of the way that we're structured, the way our economies are structured, and in particular the way that the businesses are structured and controlled, that is militating against the fundamental changes that are needed. And I think I know that this is an area that you're of particular interest in Matthias, which is sort of thinking about how they can democratize, so to actually transfer those elements of control to people like the youngsters that are coming into the organization who've got better ideas about how to solve them. So those are some of the, did I capture correctly some of the key things that you've described?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just to reiterate your point there, I think it's a very bad thing to start blaming individuals or companies and so on, because we are all in this system together, and we're all globally responsible for the system. And there's many systemic features that have caused the situation that we're in. And we are collectively responsible as well to find solutions. But to individualize responsibilities is not the best way forward, indeed. Yeah.
Whether that's a politician or an organisation, okay. So, Matthias, thank you so much for that. I think it's got a good start in terms of surveying the field and the subject. So, and I think we can perhaps now switch, if I may, Neil, to you as an experienced and senior practitioner. Who's got, and I hear you saying about, these issues being in your DNA and in the DNA of the organisations that you've worked for. It would be great to hear your insights in terms of how organisations are developing their response to these issues of sustainability and inclusivity. And I know that you've got some very specific examples of that. And you've heard Matthias set the scene, so it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that. Neil, can I bring you in at that point?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Yes, so as Matthias has already given us a good view of what it could look and should look like, and listening to some of the denialists that are out there, absolutely. But I think from a organizational perspective, and having worked for local organizations within South Africa and now with a multinational, it's interesting to look at the contrast between local, who are looking at what's happening global, and we've got some really big players locally that are getting rid of plastic. They're following the likes of Marks and Spencer and Tesco, etc., watching the UK. So plastic is going to even putting solar panels on office buildings to reduce the CO2 footprint, and recycling rainwater, and really taking some of the big things that we're seeing, and then also translating that into product development. But working now for a multinational where the sustainable lens and the responsible lens and ethical lens starts at the top. And it's not just something that they talk about, it's in our DNA, it's the way that we do things, it's the way that the organization operates, but it starts with the CEO who lives and breathes a responsible and ethical business culture. And each of the executives, from the top all the way down, it's part of who you are. And it's not just, oh, today I'm going to be ethical, but it looks at how do we source, where do we source, what do we do, who do we do business with, and how do we do business with them? And whoever we do business with, are they ethical in their dealings? Have they got a sustainable track record? How do you make it real? Well, in the business world, and I'm sure the panelists will agree, you hear what gets measured gets done. So it's simple. We set KPIs, and just yesterday locally for our local entity, we actually looked at our 2030 roadmap on sustainability and on making our contribution to the global organization in removing plastic, reducing water, and also CO2, just as three of the big things. Now, Europe is a lot more advanced than what we are, but we catch up very quickly, even though we're at the bottom end of Africa. We see the trends, we work with the trends. Plastic in fillers. So, when you order something online or you distribute, use bubbles. It's very easy because the machine makes bubbles and you stick them in the box and off it goes. But how do we then look at, well, there's machines that can do that with cardboard. So for one of the things, you get people that then start going, oh, practically, how do I make this work? Well, we've got boxes that are coming in. And then we take the product out, and then we throw those boxes back into a recycling plant, and then now we're going to reuse the boxes to become the full. It's not taking recycled paper; it's actually removing stuff from the land, from waste. One of the big objectives that the organization set was zero to landfill, and as long as I've been with the organization, that has been the case. 100% zero products go to any landfill anywhere that I'm aware of in the world. And like I say, from a day-to-day, it's everything you do. Am I being sustainable in what I'm doing? Can the company that's supplying me make sure that if the raw material can be replaced? Is it being sustainably replaced? Is it being ethically sourced? So whether it is palm oil, whether it is sourcing a supplier to provide transport, it's looking at all of the big items, and even the around sustainability in our plants. We've got plants that have gone waterless. Now you go, how do you go waterless? Well, it's not the product, because you'll use the water in the product, but from a recycling perspective, no fresh water is used in those plants, and there's a target to get more and more of the plants to what we call a waterless or a dry plant over the next 10 years. We've already moved a number of plants around the world where water will be recycled for use within the plant, not in the product, but within the plant itself. So there's a lot of much more cleverer people than I am that are looking at this, and it's like I said, it's from the top down. It's doing the right thing with nobody checking that you're doing it. So you just do it naturally. And Matthias's point in terms of the students are bringing about the change. We have an enormous number of young people that come into our organization, and they come with different thinking. They challenge. I don't consider myself old at 52, but the youngsters that are coming in, the 21-year, 22-year-old, and what I see even here within South Africa, they have got a different way of thinking. They are switched on to what's happening worldwide from a sustainability and an ethical, and they challenge, and they are not scared to be the mouthpiece of change. And it's really great because they make you think. So they make you think.
And that's definitely a thing that we've all seen, actually, and it's a really crucial one, actually, isn't it, for the future of our conversation about responsible leadership. And Neil, thank you for sharing some of the examples that you had in your case there. I will come back in a second, actually, to the point about the next generation coming into the organisation, if I may. But can I just stay for a second with the subject of responsible leadership? Because one of the key points that you made, of course, is that leadership from the top, from the CEO. You use that really interesting phrase, which you often hear about culture, right? So it is what you do when people aren't watching. Is there anything that the organisations that you know and that you've worked in do or don't do to make sure that that leadership commitment to responsible management that starts at the CEO, how leaders through the rest of the organisation are measured, developed, such that they also put it at the centre of their tasks as leaders? Perhaps you have your own example of that. Is there something more you could say about that?
So again, from the organization that I'm in today, we have a ethics day. Not that ethics only gets lived on one day, but that's driven again top down at every level of the organization, where it starts off with the CEO. And on that particular day, you have direct access to him. And questions get asked all around the world. And there's thousands of questions that got published, and he answers. Front and center, answers those questions. At the same time, there's sessions set up locally, where the local MD gets asked questions by local team members. Again, you are not prompted. They come at you live in a chat session, and you need to be able, you answer what you can, and then everything else gets carried over, and we will reply to those, and the same with the questions around the world. Through the organization as well, where we are today, we've got ethics correspondents. And again, it's not that we live it one day, but every organization or every entity has got somebody that is locally responsible to the MD to make sure that we are all living to this core value. And it's it's something that just happens naturally for the leadership, and people will be challenged by the ethics correspondent, to a member of the exco, when they get complaints or they get queries, or somebody has raised the question. You get asked, and it doesn't just get brushed under the carpet. It gets investigated, and if the person believes that the question that they've raised or the problem has not been dealt with locally, there's an escalation process again that takes you back to the head office, and so the whole cycle go until that particular question has been resolved. And so it's something that we as an exco take very seriously.
And so Neil, so one of the things that really strikes me about that is that something that Matthias was keen to highlight in his introduction was the democratization of the workforce. And it sounds like there's some steps that you're taking to do that, where actually leaders are held to account by their teams in the processes that you've described, such that it's not being held to account from the top just only, but also from the bottom. And that sounds to me a little bit more toward that democratization idea, would you say, don't it?
Very much so. And at the same time, we have and I know most companies do it, where you test the pulse of the people, where they give you anonymous feedback, and it's through a survey. Different companies will call it an employee satisfaction index, where you measure the temperature at grassroots level, and it's completely anonymous, and that rolls up as well. And we do that once a year, and you get that bottom up feedback. Which also doesn't stop, because we've got ad hoc feedback. It's a culture that asks for feedback, and whether you like feedback or not, I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's what you do with it when you get it, and that's something that the organization is really, really focused on. Is they get the feedback bottom up, because to change as an organization, if we don't listen to the people, then you land up with an organization of disgruntled people who think that this top down, and the days of top down management are gone. As a leader, I am responsible to my team, and I'm accountable to the MD. But as the leader, I need to listen to them.
So it seems to me
I've
like
got
that's quite a
40
key point about in terms of when we're thinking about responsible leadership. Actually, that there's an element there which is about that kind of top-down autocratic control, freaky style of leadership. I mean, I think we hear that a lot actually. And Neil, if I may, I'd just stay with you for a second longer because we've had quite an interesting question come from our panel here. Our audience. From Howard, and I think this might be one that you touched on a little bit. Is that, and the question is, do the panelists think that even in companies that are exploring new visions at the level of the C-suite, there is often a disconnect between this and the experience of new recruits in the selection and recruitment process? So is that something you're experiencing, or is there more of a connect between the division of the top and what people bring into the organisation? Is there something you could say about that?
I think if I look at for us from a recruiting perspective, we look for fit into the organization. So, and not from a skills, because you can read the CV, you can do tests if you need to, but from a values, and there are questions that we will ask to test values and to see whether the person will fit within the value system. 9 out of 10 times what we see with the youngsters, again, that are switched on and tech savvy, they've gone and done their research and they start asking us questions about the values and about the culture and how we as a local management team live that culture. So again, I think it depends on the company and where it gets driven from. And not all companies, as we see in the question, will have seen or done the level of culture or trying to change the culture as what our organization does do. And again, it's about how you bring those people into your organization, because the values have got to fit both.
Yeah, absolutely, and actually, one of the things, the conclusion we seem to be coming to, we actually almost want that group, that new population, to be pushing you and challenging you with those new ideas, and being prepared to stand up and say, I actually disagree with what you're doing, and that seems to be one of the things that you would certainly would promote, Neil. So, Neil, thank you so much for your contribution, a very practical experience there in terms of our subject of responsible leadership. And perhaps I can now turn, and I think it's perhaps an appropriate link. Turn to you, Harsh, and your expertise, of course, is within the younger generation, if I can put it in those terms, and you're developing ideas of sustainability and inclusion into putting them really at the heart of the curriculum. So perhaps you could share with us how you do that, I suppose, is the fundamental question, but also what reaction you're getting to that you're perceiving from your students, and how they pick that up, how they engage with the responsible and inclusive curriculum. Harsh?
Yeah, I think, Craig, before answering that, I think, first of all, I want to echo Matthias' observation that we don't really have easy answers to this. And so, as academics, we are often taught we know how to teach what we know, but then how do we teach what we don't know? So there's not an easy answer for that. The best we can do is remain critically reflexive ourselves, keep questioning ourselves, our own assumptions, and also encourage students to start questioning what we are teaching them and what's kind of taken for granted in terms of what is business knowledge, what is the core discipline. And that's how I think change can really come about. And just within the spirit of that, as we interrogate our own practices, I want to give some practical examples of some practical issues that we often overlook in international business schools. Like, we often fail to engage with the lived reality of what our students are really experiencing, how they are engaging with the others. So, typically, if you look at the ethics curriculum textbooks and all, we stand on the high moral grounds and we try to teach, thou shalt do that. But are we genuinely engaging with it? Are we empowering the students to actually empathetically and respectfully engage with the challenges of those whom they're trying to support, but at the same time also recognize the strengths that these groups have, whom they're trying to support? Are we equipping them with the skills that they need? And if there's time, then I would like to give an example from our business school in this respect. Second, I think we need to understand that most of our students come to university to enhance their career prospects or to enhance their employability prospects, because we have moved away from elite education and we have moved towards mass education. And we need to realistically accept that if unemployed graduates won't really have sufficient agency to contribute towards sustainability agenda. So if we want our graduates to have a stronger voice, they need to have that agency to bring about the change. So we must strengthen the nexus between employability and sustainability agenda. That's another direction in which we've got some good practical examples from our school. The third thing is something that I don't really have easy answers to, but I think we must also start looking into our own backyard. We must start questioning, what are we turning a blind eye to? For example, in most international business schools, we know that many of our international students are victims to modern slavery, being underpaid in franchisees like 7-Eleven, Hungry Jack's. We hear all about that, but we haven't really found solutions to that. But I don't think they're easy solutions, but we do need to acknowledge them. We do need to engage with them. We do need to bring them into a classroom, really, as important issues. Again, the second thing is we need to start challenging some of the assumptions that are even held by prestigious accreditation international agencies like EQUIS, AACSB, for example. Who says global mobility programs and service learning are the gold standards? So, for example, in your last session, Professor Uday really beautifully pointed out the example of a student who'd come from Mahindra and Mahindra, not from a very privileged background. He brought with him wealth of empathy, wealth of real life experience. Why don't we hold that as gold standard? Why do we hold as a gold standard where somebody from an affluent family is going and doing service learning? And, it's not easy for all students to engage with service learning. So, for example, within our own context in Australia, students who are first in the family, who have carer responsibilities, international students who are working through the night trying to do their classes in the morning, or vice versa. It's really hard for them to engage with service learning. And yet we haven't figured out easy ways of tapping on their rich experiences. How do we bring that into classroom? So I think at this stage, I've just raised questions. Craig, if we have time, then maybe I can share an example of how some of these questions have been tackled.
I would love you to do that, Harsh. Actually, we do indeed have the time to do that, because I think it's really important that the complex questions that you so well alluded to do sort of, whether, if I may use the crude term, where the rubber hits the road, as in the precise examples about how you deal with that, whether that's about the engagement with students, or we're not, the concept of teaching them is being challenged, isn't it? This is your first point, in a sense. This is more about sometimes actually us learning as business schools and faculty from their experience in the way that you've described. And I think also, and it really resonated with me when you mentioned the context in which business schools particularly operate, which is the accreditation context. And for me, I think it partly relates to Matthias's point a little earlier, that they are perhaps in some ways preserving the status quo in the way that they accredit business schools, rather than allowing us to really challenge that status quo in the way that we educate our students. So for me, that's a point that particularly resonates as the head of a business school. So thank you for sharing that point. But Harsh, I would love for you to share one or two of those practical examples that you're talking about, where you unpick some of these complexities with your students, if you will.
And I think the first example I would like to share is really student-driven, because I think it's really the students who will bring about the transformational change. So one example is like we had a work-integrated learning experience, service learning, where students from MBA, a student team from MBA, executive MBA, went to Cambodia. So before they went to Cambodia, they actually did crowdfunding and they collected some funds. They went to Cambodia to kind of uplift an orphanage. So the walls were falling apart, the flooring wasn't good. So they tried to use those funds to refurbish the buildings, to create a play area, and they started talking to the kids. As they started talking to the kids, they realized that kids talked about their daily routine. They talked about everything, their lunch, their dinner, but there was no mention of breakfast. And there was one student who actually said, you've said everything, but you didn't say breakfast. And much to our students' surprise, the orphanage told them that we don't have funding for it. The funding has been cut, so we could only afford 2 meals, and we've made a strategic decision that kids would get lunch and dinner, but they have to forego breakfast. And this student came back. She really couldn't cope with it. So she came back, she finished her executive MBA, she took 3 months of unpaid leave from her employer. She did some crowdfunding, collected $3,000 US, and she knew that these won't last long. So, $3,000, she could only feed kids breakfast for 1 month. She went back to Cambodia. She had an alumnus from that orphanage, and she worked with her, collaborated with her. They started a breakfast cart. Soon that breakfast cart picked up, And then they started a dinner cart. And then in the business model, they had a model so that some profits from that dinner cart could be channeled back to the orphanage, so that there was a sustainable solution for that. So in some ways, I think we really need to celebrating these stories of our students, because they are the ones who are finding really good solutions.
What a wonderful story, Raj. And I think we'll all remember that one, actually. And it's the kind of thing in some ways that, and I know you will indeed subscribe to this, that we live for as academics, isn't it? Being able to have that kind of impact of students, and in so many ways, I think we've only just scratched the surface of what we can actually do there. And there's a massive opportunity, isn't there, for us to be able to have that kind of impact. So, Raj, thank you so much for sharing that. And I do have one question actually from our audience, which I think is a relevance to what you've been saying there. And this is from Clarice, and Clarice has asked the question about, I think, about our role as academics, and you have touched on this, and this is about academic activism. Actually, is there a role for us as academics to be able to support these movements, if you like? Your perspective on that?
May I, Craig?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay, so Craig, just one thing that, where you said that where we impact students, I think in the previous story, I felt we were impacted by our student rather than the other way around. We learned immensely from that student. And I think she's left a legacy that is inspiring many more generations to come. So the other thing is, there's another wonderful example. We have a large cohort in a Master of Information Systems course. We have large cohorts of international students. And in a supply chain management unit, the academic really understood what's the issue that these students are grappling with. Most of them really want employment at the end of their degree. They all want permanent residency. They all want to get jobs in Australia or in other parts of the world. So what he tried to do was, what are the skill sets that they need? So he designed an assessment, because we all know that assessment drives learning. So he didn't kind of actively go and speak in terms of activism as a blatant activism that we should be fighting for their causes, but in a very subtle and nuanced way, he designed an assessment where he required students to go and approach a small business owner, because that's where most students are likely to find jobs. In Australia, it's the small and medium enterprises where most of the jobs for our students are likely to be. So he required students to go and approach a business owner, source a problem from the business owner, and then try to find a sustainability solution for a problem that they were grappling with. And in the whole process, the students gained confidence. They kind of got the practical experience that once they finish their degree, or if they're looking for a work-integrated learning experience, how do they approach business owners in Australia? How do they get practical experience? And so once they approached it, they were able to offer solutions. And in some cases, our students even got employed by those business owners. So yes, there's a place for academic activism, but I think in addition to the climate action, we also need to start becoming more empathetic with the lived reality of our students. So we need to walk the talk.
And I think we would all absolutely subscribe to that, especially in business schools, but not exclusively in business schools, of course. But you and I, that's our environment. And so, Raj, thank you so much for that. And again, another fantastic example of where that reciprocal learning goes on. And one of the things that I've picked up from what you've been saying is also that in terms of preparing our students for responsible and inclusive leadership, it isn't just about the content of that. It's also about the development of their skills, their confidence, their ability themselves to be activists as they go into the workplace. And that's so important as well as part of that education that we're giving them, I feel. So that for me was one of the key points, I think, that also that came from your insights there. So thank you so much for that. And I'd also like, and I think perhaps it's a point at which I'd like to bring in our two colleagues who really typify the scholar practitioner for me, who have the ability to be able to take an academic and a real practitioner perspective, particularly from entrepreneurship, and that's Sebastian and Shashi. And Shashi, perhaps I could start with you on this question. And in fact, our last audience question was also referred to the pandemic. And you've heard the insights from the panel so far, Shashi. And as an entrepreneur and somebody who's also studied these subjects academically, what's your perspective about how responsible leadership is now inculcating the thoughts of an entrepreneur, particularly in the current pandemic, Shashi?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Thank you, panelists. It's been a really interesting morning listening to you all. Coming straight to the question that you have asked, we have really been tested to the hilt in this pandemic. My organization, which I invested in, we started almost 7 years back. We were at a stage of an organization where the organization should be growing, and we suddenly found ourselves faltering because the pandemic brought everything to a halt. All our investments, all our businesses, all our business models, everything that we aspired as an entrepreneur, you would always want to have things like sustainability, inclusivity, built into the DNA of an organization. And we had been doing exactly that till we are really tested. But I guess the real thing of sustainability and inclusivity, engaging people is only relevant if you are able to do that in times like the pandemic that we are facing right now. We have been the lucky ones when we were tested to that. The fact that sustainability and inclusivity were a part of our DNA, that we were able to respond to the situation rather well. To give you a very concrete example, we employ more than 2,000 people in one of my organizations, and India got into a sudden lockdown. A sudden lockdown meant the prime minister came online and said that from tomorrow onwards everything has been shut down. No movement, no allowance for anything at all. So we were in healthcare, so we were allowed that okay, you can operate, but on the ground, it's a very difficult situation when the police doesn't know whether you belong to a healthcare organization, so you're allowed to move or not. And empathy goes for a toss when the police has been asked to control a population as big as 1 million people. Our people were really tested, the leadership was really tested, where everyone came to the job despite huge hardships for them. So we have nurses on the ground, we have ward boys on the ground, we have people who are working in the factory. We run a laundry, one of the biggest laundries of India. It was extremely difficult for these people to come to the job. They were really brave to have found their own solutions. Organization, we as people really, as the leaders, could not really do much for them because no one would listen to us in an environment like that. So every person who came to the job came because in the 6 years that we had been working in peace times, the inclusivity inculcated into them. They felt like it is their company, it is their responsibility. If we don't come to the work now, we will be feeling not just our services, but we'll be feeling a sort of a family feeling that we had been able to create. This was a great example for us, possibly a great example for anyone. I had been teaching employee engagement for a long time, but to see employee engagement in practice is what it actually happened out there. They were at risk because we are in a healthcare environment. They are not going to a simple place. They are going to a place where the chances of their contact COVID in a time when PPEs were a big issue, and it had become a very big issue. We were unable to, India did not produce any PPEs. All the PPEs were being manufactured in China, and we were not able to import much. Fortunately for us, it's a very synergistic relationship where we started manufacturing washable PPEs because we are into a linen company. We do manufacture a lot of linen for the hospitals. We innovated on our feet. We started manufacturing washable PPEs. Our employees were our first thought. We did not sell it. We could have made a huge amount of money by selling it to a lot of people who were looking for that. But because our people cared for us, we cared for our people. The first recipients of our washable PPEs, which were extremely expensive because the linen was still being imported from abroad, were given to our people. So my experience investing in India is that if you really want a responsible management and you want to create an organization which is high on ethics, high on sustainability, high on inclusivity, you have to build it into the DNA of the organization. You cannot do that at a later stage because it does not really. So grafting on ethics does not work. So either you have it in you or you don't have it in you. Fortunately for us, it doesn't happen all times. That as an entrepreneur, if you do that early on in your organization, we know of companies in India who we want to, emulate. Tata's is a great example for us. So when we started this organization, we had a very single goal. As far as ethics are concerned, we want to be known as what Tatas are known for, ethics. And this includes everything. In the pandemic, I believe as our leaders, if you are not at the forefront of taking a risk, ensuring that the people trust in you, you have to really, as Harsha was saying, if you don't walk the talk, it is impossible for you to be able to do that. When Matthias was speaking, he made some great comment on conflict between profitability and sustainability. Almost all organizations have this issue that where do you draw a line as to how much can you invest in sustainability that it does not really start hurting your profitability. I had a very interesting take on that, and I guess I will finish my comments onto this. How, and again, we have discovered that pandemic was a great filter for us and a great lens for us, where it tested a lot of our assumptions. One of the best things that as an investor I realized was that at least for sustainability, it's a hugely capex involving exercise. If you do not have the capex involved early on, it becomes, especially in a company like ours, which are industrial firms. So we have put in huge amount of capital early on in technology in ensuring it will not cause air pollution. Delhi is a hotbed of air pollution right now, and it is always a problem for us. But every year when there is a shutdown of industry because of air pollution, we are spared because we invested huge amount in preventing air pollution, preventing water pollution, and going on for more sustainable solution. But the only reason we could do that is because we invested very heavily early on in water reharvesting, water recycling, ensuring heat recovery systems were put in place. And had we not been well funded through our partnership with Servizi Italia, it would have been very, very difficult for us to be able to do that. So what my suggestion is, and everyone possibly listening to that, is that as a developing nation, it is our responsibility that we do not let India go where it's already heading towards very, very badly. We should not be going to the direction where we are. But as a developed world, I live in UK, I live in India, so I understand both the worlds. As a developed nation, I think it does become a responsibility of all developed nations, all developed companies who are investing in India, to ensure that they provide the companies with technology, and they provide the companies with, you can say, sustainable solutions. Many times we are looking more for solutions. We want to do that, but we don't know who to approach. We are putting in a lot of systems in place which are for renewable energy, renewable water, but the country does need help. And once it is provided, later on, the costs become much less. It becomes cheaper for us to produce, and we are sustainable at the same time.
Thank you for that. Actually, there's a number of insights that you brought to the conversation there, and thank you. And I see Matthias nodding there in terms of you're talking about the commitment right up front from an entrepreneur to sustainability, and to make those investments right up front and have that support that will then pay off in the longer term. And it almost seems to me like what the pandemic has done in your organization, Shashi, is it's almost acted like if you put this in manufacturing terms, it sort of stress tested your organization, and it's passed that test because you had in place that DNA of employee engagement, of innovation, of responsible management, and those are some of the things that actually has allowed you to get through this massive crisis. And that for me is a really interesting way of thinking about relating the subject of managing responsibility to actually the surviving and the thriving of your organization in the most severe circumstances. So Shashi, that's a really fascinating example for us. Thank you for sharing that. And Sebastian, you've been very patient, and you've also got this great perspective that you have the academic hat and also the entrepreneurial hat. And Sebastian, I would be great to hear your perspectives on some of the conversations we've had so far as an entrepreneur and how you're seeing the situation right now in terms of responsible management. Sebastian. Sebastian,
let me start by saying thank you to all.
Please.
So let me begin by saying thank you to all the panel members. I think that they painted a very accurate picture of the challenges that we're having, both before the pandemic and since the pandemic. I would like to take a micro-entrepreneurial approach and really speak out to the startuppers, the young students, whether they're in the West or whether they're outside of the West. And I think the first thing that I'd like to address is this human tendency to talk about them and how they should solve this and how the United Nations ought to do something. And I really would like to bring it home to me. What is it that I can do? And I really want to emphasize the issue of creativity and the issue of proactivity. Because we can talk about what they should be doing and what's going on in the world and what Donald Trump has done wrong and what Brexit is faced with. And really, we're not going to have a lot of impact in our own personal microcosmos. So I want to emphasize the issue of creativity and bringing solutions. And I want to use an old saying, every general sort of prepares to win the last war. In other words, I think that we have to be forward-looking and have to be thinking into this new world that we are in. I believe that 2020 is kind of like 1947, when the entire world is being reshuffled. And many of the things that happened in the old era are not going to be true in the new era. So I think that the micro-entrepreneurs have to be thinking forward, have to be thinking about some creative solutions as to how do we solve some of these problems. How do we solve personal problems? We talked about employability. We talked about, having a job, having a house and things like that. And how do we solve some of the problems around us? And that's the second issue that I'd like to bring. I think that when you talk about ethics or lack thereof, because unfortunately we look around the world and there's really quite a bit of corruption, quite a bit of shenanigans going on. I think the root cause, or one of the root causes, is personal greed. And in my experience and what I advise to my clients and my students is early on, they make a personal commitment of a stop loss. Where they say, look, as an entrepreneur, I am not going to be the wealthiest person in the world. I'm going to put a stop loss on myself, voluntary, and I'm involved with a group of people who have actually signed a pledge. And as entrepreneurs, they have said, we will stop at $10,000 per month. I know that for some people that sounds like a high figure, but for other people, that's actually a reasonable figure. And they have made a commitment, and they have said, we will only take $10,000 for ourselves out of the companies and the things that we're involved in. The rest of it we're going to be using for various social projects, for investments and things like that. And I think that this is one of the approach that at a micro level, we can at least neutralize some of the greed, some of the drives that turns into a macro problems, in terms of bribes, in terms of people siphoning money from the governments and things like that. Because I think that as we move into the future, the opportunities for corruptions are going to be even greater. I'm seeing worldwide huge investments coming from governments and just giving money to people. I'm seeing it here in America where I'm at. I'm seeing it in Romania, my country of origin, and in other parts of the world. I'm seeing a lot of unethical possibilities given technology. Surveillance capitalism or surveillance communism, and all kinds of things that are possible now because we have the technology. So I think that when we talk about responsibility and when we talk about ethical management, it really starts at the personal level. It starts with the personal commitment, where I personally do not want to become the wealthiest person in the world. Quite opposite, as an entrepreneur, I am really being driven by wanting to make the world a better place. Helping that orphanage that professor was talking about, or providing jobs for somebody from an underprivileged group or underprivileged language group. Things like that, I think, provide a lot more sustainable and a lot more humane, if I may, solutions to the problems that we're faced with and moving forward in the challenges that I'm sure we're going to be having.
Sebastian, thank you so much. And I think in 2 or 3 minutes, you've managed to capture an absolutely critical insight into our subject. That idea of personal responsibility, personal creativity, and personal responsibility, which is defined by a collectivism rather than an individualism, which is unfortunately, and I think Matthias, coming right back to some of the comments that Matthias and Harsh particularly have made, which has to transform the way that we educate our young people, learning from them, and by understanding that they are actually now bringing to the workplace much more of a collectivist feeling for their societies, wanting to contribute to society, and giving us a couple of very good examples of that, actually. So coming down to the individual, that's the sort of thing that we have to encourage, promote, learn from, and bring into our organisations. That will be truly transformative, won't it? As those attitudes and behaviours start to filter through to our organisations as well. So, so Sebastian, thank you so much for that. And colleagues, I'm very conscious of us being up against time, because it's one of these subjects that I know that we could carry on for at least another hour and come back to all of you to reflect on some of the conversations that we've had. But as your host, it behoves me to keep to our time. I think it would also be remiss of me to in any way attempt to sum up those many critical things and insights that you've brought to our conversation today. So it just remains for me to thank all of you sincerely for what has been, for me, a fascinating but also enjoyable conversation, which I've learned a lot from as well. And I hope that you also have picked up some of that from your fellow panelists. And so, judging by the comments that we're getting as well, our audience has also picked up many insights from that conversation. So thank you so much. And at that point, I shall now hand back over to the Master of Ceremonies, Ruchi, who will finish off the session for us. Ruchi.
Thank you so much, Craig, and panelists. Thank you so much. This has left such deep thoughts. And Craig, I think it's only fair that we take this conversation forward in some way. And I think this is probably just the starter of a lot of things that we can do with this rich global content that is generated through Resilient Lincolnshire Global. And in my head, I'm just bursting with ideas on what all we can do collectively with the panelists who have put in so much into making this discussion so rich. So I think there is something to say about that permeable knowledge and university discussion that we often have, that let thoughts flow from local wherever we are to a global context, and then back again, embedding it back into our local context. So it's so enriching. Thank you very much. And it takes a lot of time, effort, and willingness to contribute to a panel like this. And the time that you all have given is absolutely appreciated, both Craig, yours, and the panelists individually. But there's one more person I must thank, as we're in the third episode of this, which is Tars, if you don't mind coming into our broadcast room, please, because it's a session like this doesn't happen without bringing it together with a lot of effort. Tars has been the project manager for this right through. So Tars, thank you to you for the effort, for bringing all this together. Thank you so much. And Tars, this is the third of 4 that we had planned. So the richness of the fabric in the conversations is amazing. What have we got for the 4th one coming up?
Yes, thank you, Ruchi. It was a fascinating and sort of really insightful conversation and discussion that took place today. So I'm really pleased that these are sort of hitting the spot, and the audience is engaging with this really well. So we've got one more coming up in this series, and I'm just going to flash up onto the screen our next webinar, which is the technology lens. So we'll be exploring this, and Chris Hedliand, who is an associate professor in computer science, will be anchoring this one there. And as you can see, we've got a good range of panelists from around the globe again, and they'll be sort of contributing to this sort of conversation, looking at it, in terms of the transformative sort of digital vision for organizations, the ethical implications of exponential technology such as AI and cloud and the power of sort of big data there. So that is next week on Thursday at 8:30 UK time. And we hope that this one is just as insightful and informative as today was.
Thank you. Thanks, Tars. Thanks so much. And, we can clearly begin to see how the responsible and technology lens start coming together. And I think we alluded to it as well, towards the end of responsible use of technology again. So it all comes together. And I'm hoping that, with the help of the Center for Resilience at the university, we will be able to, Craig, at some point, bring these write-ups from these 4 lenses into something which makes content for all of us to think about and take back to our places. So panelists, we will look for your support as we try to pull these things together and really use what you have experienced yourself.
Absolutely. With the consent of our panelists, this is just the start of the conversation.
Thank you so much then, once again, and I'll bring this to a close. To our panelists, to Tars, for you for pulling this together, and Craig, of course, as always, an absolutely brilliant anchor and so engaging at all times. So thank you very much for joining us, and to our audience who joined us today, and for those who see it recorded later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.